Good morning. Everything connects. This week, Britain faces a crisis over soaring gas prices, which we're told will hit food supplies and, of course, household budgets. Abroad, China angrily digests the new submarine deal between Britain, the United States and Australia. And both of these things affect one of the biggest challenges facing Boris Johnson's government, getting a new global deal on climate change at November's World Summit in Glasgow. There, ministers have to show the UK really is a world leader without savagely hitting the bills of their own voters, while at the same time uniting countries which are increasingly suspicious and hostile. The UN warns there is a real risk of failure. Everything connects. We will try, as we always do, to join the dots. And so this morning I'm joined by Alok Sharma, the Cabinet Minister serving as President of that summit. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is going to be here to discuss renewed COVID fears in the capital. And it's conference season. Today it's the Liberal Democrats and their leader, Sir Ed Davey, is on the show. But there is another story this morning. A major development in the attempts to get Nazanin Ratcliffe back from Iran. I'll be joined by her husband, Richard, here in the studio. Now, frankly, this matters more than the welter of commentary about the cabinet reshuffle this week, but we're not going to ignore it. Joining me to review this morning's news, in his first appearance since leaving Number 10, is Lee Cain, former head of communications for Boris Johnson. And he's joined by the editor of the Daily Mirror, Alison Phillips. It isn't, I promise you, going to be a dull hour ahead. Let's crack on with the news headlines read for us today by Roger Johnson.
Andrew, thank you. Good morning. The government is holding meetings with the energy regulator and industry leaders in an effort to alleviate a food supply crisis, which has been caused by a rise in the wholesale gas price. At least 4 energy suppliers could go out of business as early as this week. And the increase in price means that there's also a shortage in carbon dioxide that could cause problems with the supply and packaging of foods, including meat. Kwasi Kwarteng will meet with Ofgem today and industry figures tomorrow to plan a way forward. More than 1 million people in England will be invited to book their coronavirus booster jab this week. NHS England will send text messages and letters to those who are eligible starting tomorrow. People aged 50 and over, the clinically extremely vulnerable and frontline health and social care workers are among those who will get the jab, as long as it's been 6 months since their second vaccine. The UK's new security agreement with the US and Australia will make it safer and could create hundreds of new jobs. That's according to the new Foreign Secretary. The pact, known as AUKUS, will see Australia being given the technology to build nuclear-powered submarines. Liz Truss said that it showed the UK's readiness to be hard-headed in defending its interests. And 4 amateur astronauts have returned to Earth after 3 days in orbit. The spacecraft splashed down into the Atlantic at the end of the first all-civilian mission to orbit the planet. The crew, who underwent 6 months of training, circled the Earth more than 15 times each day. That's it from me. The next news here on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Now back to you, Andrew.
Many thanks, Mr. J. And now, as ever, to the front pages, and almost every newspaper has a different story to lead. We were hearing there about the gas story. This is complicated but very, very important, and the Observer splashes on a "Don't Panic" minister about that. We were hearing also about Liz Truss and that big controversial submarine deal which has infuriated the French. She's given an interview to the Sunday Telegraph. Truss defies the EU with vow to fight for freedom. They will like that. Telegraph readers very much indeed. The Sunday Express, as we were hearing, Boris Johnson is off later on today to Washington to meet President Biden. Boris' bid to level up the world is a fairly ambitious Sunday Express headline there. The BBC has a really grim bit of reading in the Mail on Sunday. This is another Martin Bashir related story. Goes on for pages and pages, and it's tough stuff for BBC people to read. The Sunday Times has a totally different story. The Labour MP Rosie Duffield, who has had a big row with trans activists, feels that it is too unsafe for her to go to the Labour Party conference, and now the Speaker of the House of Commons is getting involved in that. Papers in Scotland have many other stories, of course. Scotland has had a really, really hard time with COVID recently. There's been terrible stories about ambulances arriving too late to save people, and now the army is being drafted in. The Sunday Post has that story on its front page. Really, really big news, and that may or may not, of course, affect COVID, because if Scotland is in real trouble with coronavirus by the time of that November summit, some people probably won't go. Anyway, so much to talk about. Alison Phillips from the Daily Mirror, are you there? Yes?
Yes.
Good morning to you, Alison.
Good
now,
morning,
you have the jolly hard task of explaining to our patient viewers why this gas story matters so much.
Yeah, so the Observer is saying this morning that Kwasi Kwarteng, the business minister, is telling people not to panic about the gas price increase. And perhaps we shouldn't panic, but certainly by now we need to be getting really quite concerned about this. We've already seen gas prices go up by around 70% during August. There have been a number of gas companies going out of business, and there's some thought there could be as many 4 more could go this week. So the knock-on effect of that is, well, so for consumers, their household bills are going to be going up and up and up. There's some talk it could have gone up by as much as £400 in a year. So there's that element. But then in addition to that, the result of the gas prices has meant that some of the chemical firms which make fertilizers have ceased business. Now, a byproduct of fertilizer firms is carbon dioxide, which is needed in the production of meat and also in fizzy drinks and other foodstuffs. So this is where we get to the piece where not only are we having bills going up, but it could also have an impact on our foodstuffs. And this comes, of course, at the same time as we already know we've got the lorry driver shortages. We've already got a shortage of labour post-Brexit. So things like Brussels sprouts, there's a concern that they may not be getting picked. So in the run-up to Christmas, there is this idea that Christmas could actually be cancelled. The boss of Bird of Matthews says there may well be no turkeys. The boss of Iceland is saying that this is now a really critical point. And so I think that's why in the Sunday Mirror story exclusive today, there's the line that Michael Gove, in addition to all his other jobs, is setting up this committee, the National Economic Recovery Task Force, which is essentially the committee to save Christmas.
Save Christmas. Yeah. And so that is one of the after effects of this reshuffle, because Lee, almost every newspaper is struggling to understand what the reshuffle really means in political terms, and none of them have come up with a very clear answer. So what is it? What is the answer?
I think the big takeaway from this particular reshuffle is, and the buzzword in number 10 is very much on delivery. And I think we should be seen as two sides of the policy. One with the social care announcement recently, and then with this reshuffle, I think the Prime Minister is indicating that we're moving from the handling of the pandemic into more of a maintenance stage, and it's now a case of signalling to those people who voted for us in 2019 that it's getting on with the job and delivering for them.
So it's all those voters in the red wall seats, and I'm sure everywhere else as well, who are wondering, how is my life going to change? How are things going to be made better by this government? And you referred back to the national insurance rise to help the NHS and social care. That was a very, very bold and quite risky step by the Prime Minister, and yet he seems to be in a bold mood at the moment.
Yes, I think it's all about, how you use and spend your political capital. I think if, in the Prime Minister's position, we accrued an awful lot of political capital in 2019, and I think you can a lot of poorer administrations will let that sort of drip out over time. And I think what he's looking to do is to be bold, to signal that he is going to tackle the difficult issues, and to hope that the political capital he's spending on both big policy decisions, but also onto empowering this new cabinet to go and deliver for him, will reap dividends when it comes to the next election. Is
this an election reshuffle?
I think, of sorts. I think there's been talk that was sort of quashed by number 10 of an early election. I think
you don't think that's going to happen?
I think that I don't think an early election is likely. I think we've lost 2 years to COVID already. So you already have limited time for delivery, and I think this administration will be focused very much on the delivery and every moment they can get. I think also we've had an awful lot of elections. We've had the referendum and we've had 2 generals. the public are broadly bored of that. And I think they want to just see a government get on and actually deliver the things they've talked about.
They want to see the hospitals, they want to see the trains arriving, and all of that stuff.
And I think further than that, I think if a government was seen to sort of cynically go back to the polls early for political advantage, they would be punished.
That always happens. Alison, we mentioned Boris Johnson and indeed Liz Truss, the new Foreign Secretary, heading off to the United States. The slightly excited Sunday Express headline is "Levelling Up the World." But just talk us through why this is actually a really, really important meeting for the Prime Minister.
Yes, so they fly out this afternoon, and Boris Johnson has said that when he gets there, he's going to be making a huge effort to really ensure that people are going to be held to account in advance of the COP, which is really fast upon us now, and that there is going to be a real push towards end of coal, electrification, and all the things that we need if we are actually going to meet those targets that are there. I mean, the only slight thing is there is now sort of a very real thought that the Chinese aren't going to turn up to COP. But there is a lot of work for Boris Johnson to be doing when he does arrive in New York. And of course, it's the first time that he's been to the White House, and there will be other things up for discussion there. Liz Truss will obviously be there talking about trade. There's the issues in Northern Ireland, which we know keep coming up. And of course, when relations did hit a bit of a low, well, a real low, during the Afghanistan retreat from Kabul. So there's an awful lot there, and this is the opportunity, I guess, for Boris Johnson to try and really see if he can stake that claim to the global Britain.
Very interesting. Lee, Liz Truss has given an interview today in which she seems to be saying, let's go back to the old verities of the Vote Leave campaign. We're going to have deregulation, we're going to have tax cutting and so forth. A bit overcooked, perhaps, that story, do you think?
Yeah, I think I think potentially, and it's not quite what I think Liz is saying in the Sunday Telegraph today as well. So I think while Liz did a very good job in the department for trade, and I think she'll be very much seen as someone in this Tiggerish mould. I think we've got here from Tim Shipman's long read as someone who will certainly sell the virtues of global Britain abroad. So I think that's sort of where they'll be focusing on when they go.
Your old mate Dominic Cummings has been causing trouble all the time, of course, and he said at one point that that you all thought that Boris Johnson wasn't up to being Prime Minister. I don't know if that's true or not, but he certainly seems to be unbound at this point. He seems to be freed to be himself more.
Yeah, in terms of the Prime Minister, I think he certainly is. I think if you look at, we go back to the sort of reshuffle and delivery, you mentioned Dominic Cummings, and I think one of the things that I remember from when we first came in after the general election was a Prime Minister who was very keen on delivery. He remembered his first tenure in City Hall and how slowly things had moved through the gears in that first term and how long things take to deliver. And I think when we came in 2019, the PM was, very much talking to, really turbocharge things forward. I think COVID totally, sort of sidetracked everything, and we sort of lost 2 years of that domestic push. And what I think is interesting in this agenda is almost taking the role that I think the Prime Minister initially earmarked for Dominic Cummings is Michael Gove. And with this, new sprawling department on.
Yeah, I do want to come on to Michael Gove in just a second. But that thing that Dominic Cummings said, that we put him into power knowing that he wasn't up to the job, that's not true in your view?
I remain somebody who's a huge admirer of both Dominic Cummings and the Prime Minister, a rare individual in that. And for me, I think the great shame is we've got two brilliant political operators who have fundamentally changed the political landscape in this country. And we achieved a huge amount from, say, the referendum right through to 29 election. And the real shame is I think that team won't work together again.
Okay. Let's talk about Michael Gove, you mentioned just now, because I think a lot of people, including me, were puzzled as to whether this was, as it were, the poisoned chalice. Michael Gove go out and sort out all those planning issues that are causing real problems in the Tory shires. He has one problem after another. Or is it that Boris Johnson really thinks that Michael Gove is the ultimate deliverer of his agenda?
I think it is certainly the latter. I think if you look at Michael's history, he does have a clear past of delivery for the government. And I think Boris has identified him as somebody who can go in and fix an awful lot of his problems. The Prime Minister's great at setting out that vision, but I think, the critique of levelling up is that a slogan without a policy. And I think, you can see not just with Michael Gove, but also I think Neil O'Brien's a really interesting appointment in there, and you've got Andy Haldane as well in the Cabinet Office.
Do you know what levelling up means? Because I'm not sure I do.
I think the government certainly needs to do more work to shape that message. I mean, for us in the last election, it's talking to people in communities that traditionally have been sort of left behind in this country, and looking at skills, education opportunities, bringing in good jobs, all of that. It can't just be high streets and infrastructure. It's got to be a far broader scope involving business and community leaders. So you need a lot
still to do. Alison, we haven't talked about the Labour conference, which is coming up next week, and of course all of this gives the Labour Party some questions and challenges too. I guess you've got a Tory government which has raised taxes to help the NHS, albeit not maybe taxes that many people want to be raised, but nonetheless has done that, and is talking about big infrastructure projects and so on. But the Sunday Times has a really closer to hand and tougher challenge in a way for Keir Starmer, which is this Labour MP Rosie Duffield, who has fallen foul of trans activists and now feels that it would be too unsafe for her to go to the Labour conference, and the Speaker has got involved. Just tell us about that.
Yeah, I think this is an incredibly sort of sad story. So Rosie Duffield made some comments in the transgender issue, and now has had all sorts of death threats, and she's had sort of attacks to her, which she's had to discuss with the Speaker. And Lindsay Hoyle has come out he had the meeting of parliamentary speakers yesterday in his constituency in Chorley, and they're saying more has got to be done to safeguard MPs. And I think, particularly for women MPs, I mean, there's a really sad quote there from Rosie Duffield, where she says, would I really encourage other women to go into politics? Now, that's a terrible situation we've got to, and there needs to be real leadership on this role. And people can have their views in whichever way they wish on the whole trans argument. But the idea that you have got women who are no longer feeling that they can do their job is a real threat to democracy. And this is an opportunity, I think, where Keir Starmer can come out very, very strongly next week and show that this cannot happen. We cannot have women being silenced. And it really doesn't matter what people's views are on this, but people have got to feel safe to go about and doing their jobs. And express free speech. Alison Phillips, Lee Cain, thank you both very much indeed. And so to the weather. It has been a beautiful autumn over the past few days. Warm sun, the first flashes of orange in the trees, but that may be about to change. I hope not, but for the actual facts, here's Sarah Keith-Lucas in the weather studio. Sarah.
Thanks, Andrew. You're absolutely right. We have had quite a warm, dry September so far for really much of the UK. Yesterday, we saw temperatures up at 25 degrees, but things are changing now. Some places have already seen the rain this morning, and many of us will see it before the day is out. This is the picture in Maidstone in Kent at the moment, but the cloud is now increasing, all on this weather front that you can see here. So as that pushes its way eastwards, it's going to bring some pretty heavy bursts of rain to the likes of East Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, East Anglia and the South East. Across this zone, we could see some localised surface water flooding for a time, with 30 to 40 millimetres of rain in quite a short space of time. Some heavy rain too for the far north and northeast of Scotland, but elsewhere some sunshine coming through later on, and temperatures around about 15 to 20 degrees. Into this evening and overnight then, we keep that weather front in the east, so that's bringing a few more spots of rain to East Anglia, the southeast too. Clearer skies elsewhere and a colder, fresher night than we've seen recently, so many of us seeing temperatures down into single figures first thing Monday. High pressure sits towards the south and the southwest. That's keeping things mostly dry for Monday into Tuesday as well. Some sunshine around, still a bit cloudy and damp across parts of eastern England. Things will turn more autumnal though later on in the week. Andrew.
Many thanks for that. Now then, they only have 12 MPs. They're polling in single digits. But after ousting the Conservatives in June's Chesham and Amersham by-election, the Lib Dems say they are now the party that can, quotes, get Boris Johnson out of government by winning seats in southern Tory shires. Lib Dem leader Ed Davey is here. Given where you are in the polls, that is still some ask. So what is the cunning plan?
I think the victory in Chesham and Amersham shows the cunning plan. We managed to take a safe Conservative seat in true blue Buckinghamshire, and the people who'd traditionally voted Conservatives switched to Liberal Democrats. And what we found in the local elections, in knocking on doors, now we're able to after COVID restrictions have been lifted, we found a lot of people very unhappy with the Conservatives. They feel Boris Johnson's been taking them for granted, and they like what we're saying when they get a chance to hear it. So that's why I'm particularly positive that in these blue wall seats, it's not just across southern England, actually, Andrew, it's places like Cheadle and Hazel Grove and Harrogate. I think we can be the strong voice that gets rid of a lot of Conservative MPs and deprives Boris Johnson of his majority.
OK, 2 points on that. I think since the early Triassic, the Lib Dems have been, and the Liberals have been winning by-elections and not then following through in general elections. But on Chesham and Amersham in specific terms, your candidate there disagreed with you over HS2 and disagreed with you over planning, and that may be why she won, which would suggest that the way to win for Lib Dem MPs is to disagree with their leader.
Well, she didn't disagree with us on planning, actually. I completely agree with her, and we campaigned very, very hard on that. And in fact, I think it's a sign of the threat that Liberal Democrats now pose to the Conservatives, that Boris Johnson's having to withdraw his planning reforms. Let's remember, they were going to give huge amounts of power to developers, the very same developers who are funding the Conservative Party. And we said no. Liberal Democrats believe in local democracy, in communities having their voice, and we were also worried about affordable housing. Liberal Democrats are very keen to build more affordable housing for young people, for young families, and I'll come to that. But the Conservative reforms would have got rid of affordable housing requirements on developers, so we were right to oppose it. I was completely in line with Sarah Green, who won the Chesham and Amersham by-election. On HS2, Sarah took a line very much like the Conservative MP, the former late Cheryl Gillen, who, she had huge respect across parties, but Cheryl fought HS2 for constituents against a Conservative government that was bringing in HS2.
Let me test where Liberal principles lie on some of the big issues of the day. Vaccine passports. Now, they're very controversial, but, you listen to government advisors, and they say that if we get another spike of coronavirus, pray goodness we don't, but if we do this winter, then that's the way to keep businesses, pubs and restaurants open and in business. What's your position, pro or anti?
We're anti-vaccine passports, and we're anti them for very good reasons. First of all, if you have been double jabbed, it doesn't mean you can't catch COVID. It doesn't mean you can't spread COVID. We think they'll be unworkable for businesses. Business already really hit by the pandemic. We've got to worry about small businesses who've been really struggling because of the pandemic. Now they're being asked by government, particularly in the hospitality sector, to have extra people checking this. I don't think that would work. And they're pretty divisive as well. So all the arguments, I think, are against COVID passports, ID cards, if you like, and that's why
I think one argument the other way.
Yeah, but the Conservatives are now agreeing with us. They're backing off again.
Well, let me just put one argument the other way, which is that if there aren't vaccine passports or something else, then a lot of these businesses may have to close, and some of them will never reopen again.
I disagree with that. I think you're already seeing in many other countries who are dealing with exactly the same problems that they are able to open their hospitality sector safely and thrive. And that's what Liberal Democrats want. We really are on the side of small businesses, on the side of this hospitality sector. We've argued for them time and time again.
Let's try something else. Let's talk about free speech. What is wrong with this phrase? Woman, adult, human, female.
Well, Liberal Democrats believe that trans rights are really important because trans people are some of the most discriminated against in our society today. Huge health problems, high suicide rate, and I think everybody ought to worry about that. The real issue, I think, is the toxification of the debate. There was a
time. What's wrong with that phrase? Woman, adult, human, female.
I've made it clear what our position was on trans rights. No one can criticise me for that. What I'm concerned about is on this issue, we have been working cross-party in the past. I've worked with Conservative MPs who agree with me, Labour MPs who agree with me. What's changed is Boris Johnson coming to number 10. Boris Johnson has toxified this debate. He set up a culture war unit in number 10.
We've jumped from a phrase to Boris Johnson. I do want to come back to this phrase. What is wrong with the phrase? Can you explain to people watching what is wrong with the phrase woman, adult, human, female? What's wrong with that?
Well, I mean, the phrase actually doesn't really encapsulate the debate, to be honest. That's what's the problem with it. The issue that we have been really clear is that a trans woman is a woman, a trans man is a man. And that is the issue that we're fighting on. We believe trans rights are human rights. But I do take you back to Boris Johnson, because there was a time, let's face it, I mean, let's be honest, Andrew, these are difficult issues for many people. There needs to be an open...
I'm trying to keep off Boris Johnson at the moment and on to Ed Davey and the Liberal Democrats, because the reason I keep using that phrase, as I'm sure you know, is that one of your members, Natalie Bird, has been banned from standing as a Liberal Democrat in any circumstances for 10 years because she wore a T-shirt which had that slogan on it.
Well, we have complaints issues, which I'm not part of the Totally Independent, so I can't comment on an individual case. What I can say...
That is true, what I've just told you. That is true. And, you know, the Liberal Democrats used to be a tolerant, open party, keen for debate and keen above all for free speech. Now, you disagree with Natalie Bird, she disagrees with you, but with that single phrase, she has been cast out of your party. Well, that's not liberal, is it?
Well, we absolutely believe in free speech, but we also believe that we need to protect human rights and we believe in equality. And the reason I do keep coming back to Boris Johnson, I'm going to make no apologies for that, is because Liberal Democrats have been working with other parties, people in Conservative Party and Labour Party who share our view. And when Boris Johnson came, that cross-party working ended. And I think that's really a shame, because he's trying to divide people. We should be bringing people together.
I'm particularly interested in your views in this interview for obvious reasons. Do you think that everywhere in society, and I'm thinking of toilets, prisons, refuges, hospital wards, should be open to everybody, regardless of sex?
Well, if you're a trans man, you should be able to operate as a man.
So the answer is yes to my question.
Yes. I mean, we've made it very clear. And what we're concerned about is there does need to be a debate in wider society, and that debate is not being had because of Boris Johnson's failure to lead.
So to be absolutely clear, if you don't agree with the statement that all spaces should be open to everyone, regardless of sex, don't vote Liberal Democrat.
Well, no, because there are many reasons why people vote for different parties. We're talking in our conference today about the need to deal with the COVID crisis, particularly for children and young people. We want to give parents power so we can catch up on the lost learning. We want to look after carers. We want to tackle the climate crisis. We want to look after small businesses. So, I'm sorry, Andrew, when people vote, there's a whole set of issues they vote on.
So disagree with us on that, but agree with us on other issues. All right, for now, it's Ed Davey. Thanks very much indeed for coming in and talking to us.
Thank you.
Now then, top of the new Foreign Secretary's in-tray is the case of Nazanin Ratcliffe. She's been held in Iran for 2,000 days with no sign she'll be released. Dominic Raab told me her treatment amounted to torture. But like 3 foreign secretaries before him, in the end he didn't manage to get her home. Just before we came on air, I spoke to Nazanin's husband, Richard Ratcliffe, and I started by asking him what he wants the new Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, to do.
I got a phone call with the new Foreign Secretary today. To be, speaking to her 2 days into the job is I mean, that's a positive sign for sure. Partly I just want to hear that this is a top priority and that Nazanin and the others who are being held as bargaining chips will be brought home. This coming week she should be meeting the new Iranian Foreign Minister in New York when they're over for the UN event, so hopefully they'll be able to have a positive conversation. Right now I think enough needs to be enough, and it needs to be signalled very clearly to Iran that you can't use innocent people in this way. I'd really like them to be firm, to be brave and to make some clear steps.
And the clear steps would presumably involve the so-called Magnitsky Sanctions, which allow individuals who are involved in human rights violations or corruption to actually be personally targeted with sanctions. Is that what you want to happen now?
That's exactly right. We have put in front of the new Foreign Secretary a file of names of those who are involved in Iran's hostage-taking across the chain. So those who are involved in taking people, in processing them, giving them judges, those who are involved in treating them badly in prison. And Magnitsky Sanctions.
How many names you've given the government?
We've given 10 names. That's the first list. We'll do a series of them. And really, I think part of that is to say to Iran quite clearly, this is an unacceptable practice. This is hostage taking. It's not just an unfair imprisonment. And for it to be a disincentive. I mean, one of the key problems I feel these past years is that there's been no cost from the Iranian side to carrying on holding Nazanin, to carrying on holding others. And so we've seen that, now There are more people in prison, more British citizens in Evin prison than there were when Nazanin was first taken. And that state hostage taking, so that's Iran does it a lot, but other countries do it as well, has grown as a practice. So I think something like 90% of hostages these days are government held.
So to target individuals, judges and police people and all the rest of it, that's going to make a difference, because we have already got a sanctions regime against Iran, and frankly that hasn't made a blind bit of difference so far.
No, that's fair. There's lots of sanctions on Iran. There's lots of alienation from the Iranian side that they're being sanctioned and besieged, etc. There are no sanctions for hostage taking to date. That's in terms of behaviour change, a key thing as to not being seen as particularly important. And I think we're not calling for sort of broad brush sanctions on collective punishment type sanctions. It's very much focused on those who are individually responsible for
It'll be very interesting to see how the Foreign Secretary responds later on. But just as, if not more important, Nazanin herself, she's under house arrest. She's outside prison at the moment. She's under house arrest. Do you think that she may be sent back to prison? So
yes is the short answer. I think where we are exactly now is so she was back in the spring, was convicted, finished one sentence, was given a new sentence, but was not put in prison for it. Formally, she's on parole pending an appeal. And then we've had noises saying, listen, she could be released. So we've had both the threat of being put back in prison and the potential to be sent home, running all the way through these negotiations that were happening this summer.
That must be very difficult to cope with emotionally.
Real up and downs. Really hard not to live it too closely.
And you're able to talk to her more, are you? What about your daughter? Can she talk to her mother?
Yeah. So at the moment, Nazanin is staying with her mum, so it's like calling Granny's house. And probably that, obviously it's 2 years now since Gabriella came back, 2 years since Nazanin's seen Gabriella. There's a consequence of that. But nonetheless, it's not like when in prison where, you would have to queue up for ages and it would be a 2-minute phone call. Now, most days she'll be able to speak and speak quietly, unless good TV on or something, then Gabriella won't speak.
So the message to the government is sanctions on individuals now, enough is enough.
I think that's right. I think the government needs to take action and needs to be brave. I had a conversation with Boris Johnson way back to be brave, and if they don't start doing it, I think things will escalate.
If nothing happens, this is obviously a tragic story, a very difficult story for you and your family and for Nazanin, but are there wider implications for British people around the world if this isn't resolved?
So hostage diplomacy is growing. That's governments taking hostages for leverage. Unless the government steps up and makes it clear that that's not acceptable from the UK's part, where do we think global Britain will go? It will mean many more people are taken. It's not like consular protections are being written into any of the new trade deals we're signing. So yes, I think if it's not a firm point, this will become a bigger and bigger problem.
Well, Richard Radcliffe, I think under BBC rules I'm allowed to say good luck. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
Thank you.
Final preparations for this year's Labour conference in Brighton are taking place, and this time next week I'll be interviewing Sir Keir Starmer. But this morning I'm joined by one of the other major figures in the party, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. Mr. Khan, welcome.
Good morning.
Walking through London the last few days, you can see a city that is roaring back. The streets are crowded, the shops are crowded, the pubs and restaurants are very busy as well. But if COVID returns this winter, are you prepared to shut London down again?
Well, we're not envisaging shutting London down. We are working really closely with the government to make sure Plan A works. The really good news is, as you said, our city is bouncing back. Live music is back. Our theatres are reopened. Concerts are happening. People are coming back to the West End. The real reason for the optimism is the vaccine take-up. We are now having London more than 90% of those above the age of 40 with one dose, more than 86% with both. And those between 18 and 40 now, 3/4 have had one dose. We're now preparing for the next phase, the booster jab, and also for children between 12 and 15 to have the jab as well.
But when we last talked in June, London was way behind other parts of the UK, other parts of England certainly, in jabs, and that is still the case. According to the latest figures, which run up to September the 15th, I think we can see them here in a second. Yes, there we go. In terms of dose 1, London is still on 67%, dose 2, 60%, and that is way behind the next worst region, which is the West Midlands. You told me then that you're going to take responsibility of a vaccine take-up. What's gone wrong in London?
Well, I was here 8 weeks ago. We administered 8.5 million doses. We're now more than 11.1 million doses. Working really closely with Nadeem Zahawi, Sajid Javed, the NHS and volunteers. London will always lag behind the rest of the country for three main reasons.
But
our population is more mobile, more diverse, more transient. Fewer of our Londoners are registered with the GP. But the good news is, compare London to Paris and New York and LA, we're miles ahead.
Nonetheless, a third of Londoners are still unvaccinated, not properly vaccinated. That's a big threat going ahead.
That's because they're younger. So the rules were, as you remember, older people went first. We have fewer older people. And then those between 18 and 40, we've made great progress. 3/4 have received the first jab. We're carrying on to target those who've not received their first jab if they're over 18. And now we're going to move to children. But also, unless you receive your second jab, you can't receive the booster jab for at least 6 months. So it's a real incentive to be jabbed.
Another way of dealing with the problem, if there is a real problem this winter, would be vaccine passports. Very, very controversial, but an awful lot of businesses, a lot of pub owners, a lot of restaurant owners think this is the only way to keep them open. What's your position?
We're not there yet. I'm really supportive.
Are you, in principle, against them or not?
In principle, I'm not against them. I'm really keen, though, to support our hospitality, our cultural, our nighttime industries. The good news is, because of the responsibility of Londoners in having their jab, the numbers in London are pretty stable. The transmission rate is stable, the case number is stable, the numbers of people with COVID in hospitals is far less than it was before Christmas, but we must be vigilant. So I support the government having in their back pocket other things we can do if needed. One of the things I'm lobbying for now...
What would have to happen for them to take vaccine passports out of the back pocket and use them in London?
There's a trigger point, and so we're working with the government about what the trigger points are. So the two big things to look at is case numbers in London. London currently, as an average, less than the rest of the country. And the second point is the R number, the reproduction rate. If that goes too high, we've got to make sure we use other things.
Do you have a number in your mind?
No, that's one of the things we'll talk with PHE and the NHS. But there's a couple of things we can be doing, which I think we're not. One is I think we should have face masks compulsory on public transport. This voluntary system, this condition of carriage, isn't working as effectively as before. And secondly, we need to make sure we have better ventilation in our schools.
Sure. I'm just interested because on vaccine passports, you disagree with Keir Starmer. He said they were un-British and he was against them in principle.
Well, I think we may need vaccine passports. I think we're not there yet, but we may need them.
Talking of Keir Starmer, given where we are now, looking at where the Labour Party is now and where politics are now, how confident are you that you're going to win the next election?
Confident, but it's going to be hard work. Look, the results we got in the last general election were the worst we've had since 1935. If we were a football team, it's like going for the Premier League, not winning it, but being relegated. Right. And so Keir's job is to get us promoted, be competitive, be in a European spot place, and then win the Premier League. We can do it. It's going to be hard work.
OK. In one sentence, give the pitch for the Labour Party, which can win back some of those northern seats and, of course, all those Scottish seats you've lost as well. What is the single reason to vote Labour?
Because we are going to be the helping hand that enables you and your family to fulfil your potential. Decent schools to enable your children to do their best. Dignity in old age to make sure, as a pensioner, you're respected, but also during your lifetime able to afford a decent, affordable home.
Is someone who thinks that only women have a cervix welcome at Labour conference?
They are. One of the things about the Labour Party is it's a chance to debate, discuss, have disagreement in a respectful way. It's unacceptable that anybody feels unsafe going to Labour Party conference, whether it's Rosie Duffield, whether it's journalists or anybody else. We must be able to have this conversation in a civilised way. And I make this point, Andrew, which is really important. 1 out of 4 trans teenagers tries to kill themselves. These are one of the most vulnerable members of our society, and it's really important we have this debate in a cool, calm, respectful way.
So the huge emotions on both sides in this debate, and I'm absolutely not taking sides. But what does it say about the Labour Party that the Speaker of the House of Commons is having to intervene to talk about the safety of one of your MPs?
Well, it's a source of pride for me that Speaker's a Labour Speaker, and it's really important he says these things to remind us that we may have differences of view. It can be quite emotive and we can be passionate, but we've got to do it in a respectful, courteous, calm way.
If a seat came up in London, would you stand for the House of Commons again?
No, I've got the best job in politics, so I want to give that up.
That's an absolute clear no.
That's an absolute...
You're not going back to the House of Commons.
Stop making mischief.
Under any circumstances. The last time we talked, it wasn't mischief at all. We talked about the number of teenagers who've lost their lives in London. 18 it was at that point. Since then, another 5 have died, either by being knifed or by being shot. And that means that we are quite close in London to having the worst record for teenagers being killed on the streets of London ever. What are you going to do to turn that around?
So I meet regularly victims of crime and bereaved families as well. This is a big concern that the Commissioner and I share, as indeed do youth workers, teachers, parents, Londoners across our city. We have been concerned for some time that with restrictions being lifted, we'd see an increase in violent crime. The two big things we're doing is to support the police, to suppress violence. So from City Hall, we're funding more police officers, more than 1,300, but also supporting our communities, giving them constructive things to do, particularly if you're young, whether it's a youth club, having a youth worker, having access to good facilities. Mentoring is really important. It's been both tough on crime and tough for the causes. And the good news is we are making progress. Knife crime is down, youth violence is down, knife crime injuries for those under 25 is down, gun crime is down, burglary is down, moped-enabled crime is down, but I'm not complacent.
And, well, I was going to say, and yet deaths are up quite high in this particular very vulnerable group. One other big issue for London before we finish, cladding. Lots and lots of people are still living with the prospect of enormous bills going on for a long, long period of time and are really, really scared and really depressed about what faces them. Are you doing enough really to solve the cladding problem? Because it covers the entire capital. Yeah,
we are from City Hall. We're working with the government. We've got a new Housing Secretary, Michael Gove. My point to Michael Gove is going to be, look, let's not argue about who's responsible for the remediation. The government should pay the cheque to make these homes safe, and later on have the argument with the landowners, the construction companies and so forth. We have in London thousands of people whose dream of being a homeowner has turned into a nightmare, living in homes that cause them stress, anxiety and are potentially dangerous.
Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, thanks very much indeed for coming in and talking to me. And now just a brief look at what's coming up on BBC One at 10:30.
Coming up on Sunday Morning Live, we're talking about what makes us human with the broadcaster Jeremy Vine.
In a week in which the British Medical Association changed its stance, we'll be discussing the issue of assisted dying.
And Katie Piper will be here to tell us why we all need a little bit of faith.
Join us at 10.
I'm joined now by Alok Sharma, who's in charge of that all-important conference in Glasgow in November. Before we talk about climate change, and we will spend most of the interview talking about that, you may have heard Richard Radcliffe talking about Nazanin and calling on the government to use the Magnitsky Sanctions on individuals to move things forward, because it has now been almost 2,000 days, this case. What's your message to him?
Well, my message is that, of course, my heart goes out to him and his family for what they've been through. And I know that the new Foreign Secretary will want to meet him as well and discuss what more we can do to support him. Ultimately, of course, we want to see Nazanin back safe with her family here in the UK, and the UK government is obviously working on this issue.
On the eye-watering increase in gas prices, should people now be bracing themselves to the possibility of shortages of frozen food and other products?
Well, Andrew, I mean, people, of course, will be very concerned by what they're reading in the papers, what they're hearing on the news. But you will know that the Business Secretary has been having very detailed discussions over the weekend. He'll continue those on Monday with the sector. And I think the clear message that has come out so far is that people shouldn't be concerned about the risk to supply. In fact, a significant part of our gas supplies comes domestically. The imported gas primarily comes from countries like Norway. So we are secure in that. But of course, when it comes to prices, there will be concern as well. But we have the energy price cap. We have the Warm Homes discount to protect people at this particular time.
If gas prices carry on rising, and it is an extraordinarily fast and big rise that we're seeing, would you remove the green energy cap?
Well, look, I think this is, let's see where we are. I know that the Business Secretary is going to have these very detailed discussions, and we're not being complacent about this at all. But I think the clear message that I want to give to people is that we do not see risks of supplies right now, and prices are being protected.
So it's under discussion, at least, we can say that. OK, let's turn to the climate crisis, as many people call it. The object of this conference is to keep global warming below 1.5% degrees above pre-industrial. So just for people watching, what would that mean? What would 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial temperature of the planet mean for the planet?
Well, Andrew, we're already at 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and we're seeing across the world what the impact of that is. You've seen just in the last few weeks, terrible flooding in China, in Central Europe, wildfires raging in North America, record temperatures in Europe. And all of that has a terrible impact on lives and livelihoods around the world. In our own country, we are seeing the propensity for flooding to increase. We are seeing more rain. I mean, in July in London, in one 24-hour period, we had 1 month's worth of rain. So these climate is going to get increasingly worse unless we collectively work to ensure that we are getting control of global temperatures.
According to the UN people, if we carry on with the current policies before this conference and at the rate of fulfilling these policies, because not all the promises have been fulfilled, then the world is looking at temperature rises of 4 degrees. Not 1.5, but 4 degrees. Again, for people watching and wondering what all this means, what would 4 degrees mean, not for the world, but for Britain?
Well, for Britain, we are going to see increasing sea level rises. Even if we had global warming stop tomorrow, it's built into the cycle. We're going to see that. And actually, if you look at the impact on sectors like agriculture, we're already seeing the impact of that in the UK in terms of yields of wheat being significantly lower than in previous years. So all of this is going to have an impact. But I mean, never mind 4 degrees. Let's just see where we are right now with 1.2 degrees. You know, I have obviously done some travel. I was in Barbuda a few weeks ago, and this is an island that was hit by Hurricane Irma back in 2017. They've managed to do a bit of restoration, but when you go round there, it still looks like this hurricane came in literally weeks ago. And what I'm told by the people I met is that these hurricanes, these climate events are going to get more ferocious and more frequent. And so their message to the world is very clear. The biggest emitters must act.
Is the government looking ahead at possibly moving people inland from some of the most vulnerable parts of the coast, thinking of the big changes that may need to be made in the where rivers are allowed to flow?
The government's obviously investing in flood defences, but of course my role is to work and get consensus around the world so that we can limit temperature rises. I mean, let me give you another example. I mean, look at Madagascar, for instance. They've not had rain for 4 years. It is the first time we have seen a climate-induced drought and famine anywhere in the world. And these are the sort of events that are going to become more frequent if we do not get this under control.
Let me bring this back home a little bit. To stop all of that happening, you've said that you've promised that the UK will reach net zero by 2050. And I want to look at what that would mean. So, for instance, 15% of our emissions come from domestic homes. Will that have to end?
Well, we're going to be setting out a net zero strategy before COP26. We will address what we need to do across a whole range of sectors. But what I would say to you is that UK actually has been making progress. So on a 30-year view, we have managed to cut emissions by over 40% and yet managed to grow our economy by almost 80%. And so the point with this...
If we don't decarbonise our own homes, then you'll have real problems at COP for anyone else listening to us. In other words, we have to set an example, which is why I'm sticking on this. So I think something like 24.5 million homes in Britain have gas boilers. Do you need to get rid of all of those gas boilers and put in heat pumps instead?
Well, obviously, as people look to replace their boilers, there'll be alternatives available to them. This isn't about forcing anyone to do anything, Andrew. This is about providing incentives. In the same way that we are providing incentives for people, for instance, to take on electric vehicles. And the cost of these technologies is coming down significantly. So you've got companies like Octopus Energy, which are talking about halving the cost of heat pumps. So we will see this. We've seen this with every technology. I mean, look at the cost of solar.
It's down by over 90%. If you're saying that we're not going to get rid of all of those gas boilers and we're not going to put in the insulation and so on, that's why protesters get so angry. And I put it to you that the reason that you can't give me answers on this is that it's simply eye-wateringly expensive. To remove a gas boiler and put in a heat pump costs around £10,000 per house.
Yeah.
And given that the average household income is about £30,000 a house, that is an eye-watering amount.
Well, and Andrew, as I said, I mean, you've got manufacturers like Octopus Energy who are talking about halving the cost from 10,000 to 5,000. And you've seen this with economies of scale. When you have scaling up, prices do come down. I'm confident that will happen. But actually, there are two aspects of this. One, of course, is ensuring that we are supporting people as they make this transition. The other is the whole agenda of levelling up. So this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for us to create those sunrise industries of the future. And you're seeing investment already going in terms of offshore wind. You're seeing it going in terms of batteries for electric vehicle manufacturing. Okay. All of that is the process we want to drive forward.
For now, I'm thinking about the budgets of voters and people watching this programme. I'm not asking for the detailed policy, but do you have an answer if I ask you who is going to pay for decarbonising British homes, getting rid of old boilers and putting in the new systems? Is it going to be the people living in those houses, or is it going to be the taxpayer? Because there can't be any other source of the money.
So the Treasury, of course, is doing a net zero review, and they will set that out in due course, and you'll be able to see. But I go back to this point, Andrew, which is that the cost of these technologies is coming down significantly. I was making the point that this cost of solar has come down by almost 90% on a 10-year period. The cost of offshore wind come down significantly. Is why we have managed to build the biggest offshore wind sector in the world.
Well, I'm just working on the numbers that I've got from the Climate Change Committee, advising the government, and the latest figures that they've got. And they calculate that to decarbonise British housing would cost something like £12 billion every year until 2050. And to put that in context, that's the same tax rise as was announced last week for health and social care. It's a huge tax rise. And I just wonder, behind these grand headlines and the promises, very easy to make promises, very easy to have headlines about we're going to do this, going to do that. There are some really hard decisions which are going to affect your voters, which you're not coming clean about yet.
Well, no, as I said, the Treasury will set all of this out. But going back to this point about the Committee on Climate Change, back in 2015, they said the cost of going to net zero was around 2% of the UK economy, UK GDP. The latest report says between 1% to 2%. And a big part of the reason that they have dropped the cost of the transition is because of the faster drop in renewables energy prices and technologies. And that's what we're going to see as we scale up, produce heat pumps, do more in terms of offshore wind.
Down to pay for this. I said 15% was coming from homes, 8% or thereabouts, as you know, comes from aviation. And yet the emissions from aviation are going up, not down. What are you going to do about that?
So you will know that there's a lot of work going on in terms of the development of sustainable fuels, which we're supporting, the development of technology so that we can have emissions-free flight. All of that is going on. I want to be very clear about this, is that we're not talking about forcing people to do things. This is about encouraging them to move forward. And I said, of course, you also need to ensure there are incentives.
Are there no hard choices here at all? Is it not the case, as your advisors have said, that people are going to have to think about flying less, for instance? You can't just rely on technology. There will be hard choices ahead.
Well, technology, I think, is going to play a really big part in this, and the Committee on Climate Change has acknowledged that.
Any hard choices?
Well, of course, there are choices to be made, but the point I'm making here is that we talk about costs. The costs are coming down, but we also need to look at the upside. So, at the end of last year, Andrew, we set out this plan for a green industrial revolution. The Prime Minister set this out, and we are delivering on this. So if you have a look, I want to. Yes, I am exactly going to give you the detail. So there have been announcements in terms of offshore wind port hubs in Teesside, in Humberside. We've got plans set out from companies to manufacture electric batteries in Northumberland. And by the way, the site for that.
Let's turn to the bigger picture in that case. Let's look at this graph, which perhaps suggests why quite a lot of British voters might be sceptical about decarbonising. There are greenhouse gas emissions percentage by country. And the magenta line right at the top there, nice sort of pinkish line at the top, China, 27%. China is emitting more greenhouse gas emissions than all the rest of those other countries put together. If China doesn't stop building coal-fired power stations, none of this means anything. Don't you have to get a really dramatic new deal from the Chinese at this conference if this agenda is going to be successful?
Well, I mean, the figures speak for themselves. China is the biggest emitter, and they're going to be key to this. I was in China a few weeks ago, and I had constructive discussions, but very frank discussions. And I made the point that we've had President Xi Jinping set out commitments to cut emissions, set out commitments to phase down the use of coal, reduce the use of coal. And I made it very clear to them what we want to see are the detailed plans. And they have also made a commitment, Andrew, that they will cut emissions and that they will set out ambitious plans to cut emissions before COP. And the one thing they were very clear to me in all the meetings I had is that they do want to see COP26 to be a success. And so the ball is in their court. We want to see them come forward with these commitments.
You now, however, have a big diplomatic problem on your hands, because after this submarine deal with Australia and the United States, which may or may not be the right deal, I'm not talking about that, the Chinese are quite clearly infuriated. Was this really a clever time to do that deal right ahead of COP, where we badly need them there? Do you know whether Xi Jinping himself is going to come to Glasgow at all?
Well, so on the issue of whether President Xi Jinping is going to come, that's not yet been confirmed. Normally these things come a bit closer to summits, but
do you expect do you want him to come?
Well, of course we do, and I'm very, very hopeful that we will also have a delegation from China that's coming. I mean, President Xi Jinping would come for the World Leaders Conference, which is the first 2 days of COP. But of course, we want China there as part of the negotiations, and I do feel that they will come for that.
But despite their irritation over this new defence arrangement, your understanding is that they are still intending to come?
Well, I certainly expect that China will send a negotiating team to Glasgow. And I go back to this point.
If they don't,
Andrew,
it's all pointless.
Andrew, I go back to this point, which is that I've been now doing this for over a year. I've spoken directly to world leaders, to ministers, and over 100 governments. I've been, as I said, to China recently, to Russia and elsewhere. And the one message that I get is that countries understand that climate is a great leveller. It does not respect borders, and they can see in their own countries what is going on in terms of climate change, and that's why they all want us to work together and come up with consensus. I mean, it's not going to be easy. I just want to be clear. It's not going to be easy. This is a tough ask.
And Britain is in a leadership role. If Xi Jinping does come, and you say to him, what about all these coal-fired power stations you're building? He might say to you, what about your coal-fired mine in Cumbria that you're opening? And he might say, what about this new offshore oil installation that Britain is going for? Do we not have to give those things up if we're going to show a proper leadership role and not be accused of hypocrisy?
Well, the UK has shown a leadership role in terms of clean energy transition. 40% of our electricity, Andrew, was coming from coal back only in 2012.
The Cumbrian coal mine?
Well, I will come on to that, but this is an important point about coal. We're now less than 2% of our electricity coming from coal. And coal will be consigned to history when it comes to electricity mix in 2024 in the UK. The issue on the coal mine, as you know, there is a public inquiry which is running right now, so I don't want to sort of comment on precisely where that will go. That outcome will come forward. But my message has been very clear to every country. We must work to consign coal power to history.
A lot of climate protesters are planning to seriously disrupt what's going on in Glasgow. They're going to block roads, they're going to block railway stations and so forth. And they're pretty determined because they feel underneath it you're not doing nearly enough, nearly fast enough. What's your message to people going to Glasgow to protest like that?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that from a UK point of view, the NGO called Climate Action Tracker has just literally this month set out a league table of which countries are doing well when it comes to commitments and actions, and the UK is very much leading the pack when it comes to developed countries. In terms of people coming to Glasgow, of course, I think it's right that people have the right to protest, but they should do that in a lawful way, in a way that doesn't disrupt other people's lives. Ultimately, if they want a message to go forward, what they want to make sure they do this in the right way.
Staying on the theme of people coming to Glasgow, or not, Greta Thunberg famously said that she wanted to be there if it was safe enough and she wasn't sure. Given what's going on with COVID rates and going on in Scottish hospitals at the moment, the army being called in to help and so on, are you confident that the coronavirus is not going to disrupt the conference?
I'm confident that we're going to have a physical COP26. We're planning for that. But for me, what's vitally important is the people who are coming are safe, but also the people of Glasgow are safe. So there are a whole set of measures that we are putting in place in terms of daily testing regimes, in terms of social distancing, in terms of wearing of face masks in the venue. And of course, what we've also done is made the offer to accredited delegates who wouldn't be able to get vaccinated in their own country to get vaccinations, and we're rolling that out now. So I'm confident that we will have a safe event, and we're working very closely and actually very collaboratively with the Scottish authorities, the health authorities there, and of course the NHS.
Just going back to the gas issue, which we started earlier on about talking about, should people be worried about these rising gas prices now? Because you look at the numbers and they are pretty scary.
Well, as I said, we do not expect there's going to be a disruption of supply, and we have the energy price cap, the warm homes discount, and other measures in place to support those, particularly those on low incomes. But I'm not complacent about this. the energy sector, the business sector is working very hard on this issue. But it does make the point, Andrew, that actually what we need to be doing is even more in terms of renewables in our country. We've quadrupled the amount of renewables since 2010. We're going to do it again, quadruple it again by 2030. That's how you ensure that you have a clean energy mix and you have security of supply in our country.
Right, Alok Sharma in charge of that very important conference in Glasgow in November. Thanks very much indeed for coming to talk to us. We're out of time for this morning. Thanks as ever to all my guests. Join me again, please, at the same time next Sunday when we will be live from the Labour Party conference in Brighton. Until then, goodbye.